Harris type 1, because it just involves an invisible line on an X-ray. But if you compare it with the other side, you can more easily see a slippage or asymmetry. So in peds, always get both limbs. You know, if you're going to order something, say, you know, the right form, left form for comparison, and the insurance will cover it, and the tech will do it, and you're good to go. Okay? So comparative views between right and left limbs are definitely important. So what we're going to talk about today is, we talk about voodoo science. Rheumatology is, or connective tissue disorders. This is, this discipline, well, yeah, I forgot your husband is a rheumatologist, and someone can go to rheumatologist, but I mean, this is true science here. But it's not science where it's positive or negative. A lot of it is predictability or correlation. And so we're going to go through that here in this second. First of all, here are the objectives. We're going to go through several connective tissue diseases. You need to understand the features of these diseases, the populations they affect, and what they look like, and how they present. Laboratory testing. There are some that are pretty cut and dry, and some that are a little bit more by inference. And by the way, Samantha has on a dress today. Can you give a little shout out for Samantha? There you go. A little different. And then talk about the differential diagnosis. These are the diseases that we're going to talk about as we go down through here. Okay? So, aspects of testing for rheumatoid diseases. Okay, there are different types of tests here. Some tests will confirm the diagnosis. If it's positive, you have the diagnosis. If it's negative, you don't have that disorder. But many of the tests done in rheumatology are to support a diagnosis. They're not causation, they're predictability. Causation would be if you had this positive lab test, then you have that disease. Like if you have a positive lab test for like a positive RPR or VDRL, you have, and followed it up with an FTA, fluorescent antibody screen, and it's positive, you have syphilis. When you have a positive HIV screening and you follow it up with the Western blot that looks for the presence of the protein, you have HIV. But a lot of these tests in connective tissue disorders, they're positive, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have the disease. Doesn't mean you're even going to get the disease, ever. And a lot of those predictability tests, some of them anyway, are based on titers. So this is what you need to know about titers. I don't know if most of you probably understand titers, but let me go over here. If you have something in your blood, let's say it's an autoantibody, or it's an antibody directed against some pathogen, whatever, and you draw your blood up, the concentration here is 1. You have diluted the blood. The concentration is 1, and you have this many of those proteins in that serum sample. So we're going to remove half of the fluid and replace it with saline. So now the dilution is, you can say, actually 1 to 2 now. So the number of these particles in this one are only going to be half of those. We're going to draw half of it off and add another, bring it back up to the volume. So now we're down to half again. We'll do it again, and again, and again, and again. Okay? Clearly, the more you start with here, the higher the number of them you're going to have once you get out to these far dilutions, right? If I put 4 times as much in here, by the time you get out here, you would expect to have 4 times as much. This is called a serial dilution. This is what's used in connective tissue disease. If we pick something, one of the tests that we're going to talk about is called an ANA, an anti-nuclear antibody test, an ANA. If we survey the general population, there's a great many people that have a positive ANA that will never have a connective tissue disease. As a matter of fact, most everybody has antibodies to nuclear antigens. But only a few percentage of people ever have connective tissue disease. It's not causation. But if that antibody ANA titer is high enough, then the incidence of disease occurring goes up. So there are a couple of things you need to know. One of them is the detection limit of the whatever you're testing. If you have a test for this protein or antibody, and you have a volume of solution, you need at least a certain number in there in order for your test to pick them up. You know, it's like, think of it as a pregnancy test. You have to have a certain volume of HCG before it'll turn a pregnancy test positive. Otherwise, it's below the detectable limits. For those of you pot smokers out there, you got, Hala was the first to smile. I'll let you know. There are 2 tests. One of them is the detection limit is 50. And I don't know if it's picograms, do you know, Ron? Okay. 50 picograms per whatever. So below that, it's not sensitive enough to test you. But the military uses a test that goes down to 25. So there are different detection limits. So anyway, this is one thing you need to know, is it's below the detectable limits. When you get the result back on a test and it says less than 1 to 8, that doesn't mean that it wasn't there. It just means that it was less than the detectable limits. When you look at the viral load for HIV, they will tell you below the detectable limits. That doesn't mean you still have virus in you. I can promise you that. That genome is all in your body, but you don't have enough virus to show up on the test. So that's one thing you need to keep in mind in laboratory medicine. The other is what I was saying before, predictability of the disease. They surveyed a whole bunch of kids, 20-year-olds, in North Carolina, which is the #1 spot for Rocky Mountain spotted fever in the country. 25% of the population has a titer against the antibody titer against Rocky Mountain rickettsia that's less than 1 to 128. 25% of the population has a titer of antibodies to that bug. That means they've been exposed to that bug. They've been exposed to Rocky Mountain spotted fever. But 25% of North Carolinians don't have Rocky Mountain spotted fever. What's the deal? It's predictability. your likelihood of having symptoms of Rocky Mountain spotted fever only increases to an acceptable standard, whatever that is. You know, it varies from disease to disease. If the titer is greater than 128. That means so if you have a positive titer for Rocky Mountain spotted fever of 1 to 256, and you have a fever, and you have a rash, then the probability that you have Rocky Mountain spotted fever is damn high. If you have a rash and a fever, and your rickettsia titer is 1 to 4, it's not likely that you have Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind, though, is that you might have Rocky Mountain spotted fever. You've got antibodies. If I brought you back the next day and find that your antibody titer went from 1 to 4 to 1 to 64, that's, even though it's less than the 128 positive, the 4-fold rise in titer overnight increases the likelihood that, yes, indeed, you do have Rocky Mountain spotted fever. All right, so you follow me how you can use titer, because you're going to use it in clinical medicine. Yes,
Is that 4-fold increase applicable to other diseases, or is that just Rocky
It
Mountain?
most certainly is. When you're talking about rubella in OBGYN, if Jordan comes in and she has a rubella titer, this is what you're getting titers for over at the health center, right? If her rubella titer is negative, is low, meaning that she doesn't have a titer high enough of antibodies to protect her from German measles, and then she comes in with a sore, she's pregnant, she comes in with a sore throat, she's got a rash, and you get a titer, a 4-fold increase in titer means you have rubella. Okay? So yeah, you use it in a lot of things, not just connective tissue diseases. All right. So what we're going to, another thing we're going to test here besides the serum is joint fluid. Joint fluid and serum will give us different measurements of inflammation and the degree of inflammation, and of course the presence of all our antibodies. Other tests, obviously, the dermatologist will biopsy everything. Everything that comes, any rash that comes in is going to get biopsied pretty much by a dermatologist. If you're not certain, biopsy it. A little quick punch biopsy will get you the answer. And certainly x-rays, as you've seen throughout this course. All right, so if we focus on joints to start with, we're not talking about, well, talking about joints. Okay. You need to divide a joint problem into 4 different categories. One, is it inflammatory? Does it have an inflammatory cause or a non-inflammatory cause? And if you look down here, here are your non-inflammatory and inflammatory causes. You can see that non-inflammatory could include anything from normal. You know, I decided to go out and play basketball. I'm almost 60 years old. I come in the next day and my left knee is all blown up from overuse. So that's an example there. Osteoarthritis, avascular necrosis is not an inflammatory process. Mechanical, like weekend warriors, and endocrine, like a Charcot joint. And the other day, when Dr. Helmstead was lecturing, and I watched the videos the other night, by the way. So when I wrote the test questions, they were off his lectures. So the slides I had a lot of slides on Charcot joints. Is that the slide? Because what he showed, he seemed to skip that part. He talked about Charcot joints, but I didn't see a lot of x-rays on it during his discussion. Are you comfortable with Charcot joints and the x-rays?
Did you watch both?
Yeah.
I watched both of them, yeah, I watched both of them. I mean, he did mention it, but you need to understand that,
Like the towels.
and review that, what a Charcot joint looks like. He showed that a couple of x-rays, I think that were the collapsed joint, the ankle, you know, okay, so everybody's cool on that. So that would be an issue here. You're shaking your head, and you didn't see that?
Oh, I only remember like the gross, you know.
Oh, yeah, the nasty stuff.
Yeah.
The fungus, I don't like the fungus. Yeah, okay, so inflammatory would obviously be things like infection, crystallopathies, gout, pseudo-gout, and so on. Now, the other two aspects is it acute or is it chronic? Chronic issues down here, like SLE, sarcoid, osteoarthritis, you need to separate from, is that joint infected? Do you have a hot joint because of arthritis that you treat one way, conservatively, or is it loaded up with gonococcal bugs, or E. coli, which is another one, or what's the one with IV drug users? If you're going to have a septic joint and you've got an IV drug user, what's the bug you think is most likely going to be? Staph. It's going to be staph. So, because of sticking needles through the skin. If you're a young man, it's most likely it's gonorrhea, and not an IV drug user, it's gonorrhea. If you're an old guy, and you're not an IV drug user, it's most likely E. coli. So your age can, and what you do can determine the most likely. It doesn't have to always be that way, but the most likely. Another thing that he mentioned the other day, Helmstead mentioned the other day, is he talked about Pseudomonas with nail punctures to the wound. He didn't know the sneakers, and he wasn't sure how that happened, and he said, but you remember Travis, the day before, said it was, the Pseudomonas was in the glue. I've been trying to find in the literature, where is the Pseudomonas? And I can't seem to find it, that it's in the glue versus in the sneaker. You remember that conversation? Y'all didn't attend the same lectures I did? You remember this? Okay, all right. Y'all go talk to her at the break, okay? I'd like to verify that it's in the glue. But there was a study done in 1985, published in the Journal of Pediatrics, that they cultured Pseudomonas from the outside of the sneaker, and it wasn't in the glue. I mean, they didn't specify the glue. So when Travis comes back this afternoon, we need to ask him, where'd you come up with the glue? Because I want to know. Anyway, that's an aside. Yes.
So what was it about Charcot joint that you need to understand?
No, I just want you to know that a Charcot joint is a non-inflammatory process, and it's endocrine related. There's so many diabetics with Charcot joints, and that it's really a joint destruction, and you get these x-rays, and they're horrible looking x-rays, and they don't even feel it as painful because they have no sensation in their foot to start with. And that's probably part of the reason that they have a destroyed joint like that. Okay, so acute versus chronic. Now you look at, we're going to tap the knee or the joint, and there are certain things that you need to do. First, one thing you need to do is take, you gonna get 3 test tubes. 3 test tubes. The first test tube, you can send off for a cell count. They run it through a culture counter just like blood, and that'll give you the CBC essentially. The only thing with the CBC that you're interested in really is the total, the WBC count. And you need to confirm, and you will, that if there's a high WBC count, it's going to be because of SEGs. You don't have lymphocytes or monocytes or eosinophils in synovial fluid to any degree. It's going to be SEGs. Now you can expect quite a few SEGs in there. If you look right here, that if you have an elevation of, now normally there should be maybe less than 500 SEGs in a normal aspirate. Less than 500. But if you have up around 2,000 or so, then that's usually going to be non-inflammatory in its origin. If you go from 2,000 up to 50,000, then that leads you more towards an inflammatory process. Both of those are not infectious. Once the cell count gets over 50,000, that's when you call it infectious. So, I mean, that's pretty amazing. You get a cell count back that's 30,000. Well, the first thing you think of is, my God, they're blowed up with infection. No, that's not true. It's not like the blood. If you saw a 30,000 white count of blood, you'd think of one or two things: overwhelming infection or leukemia. But in the joint fluid, the ranges are much different. Okay. The second tube you're going to send off for is for gram stain and a culture sensitivity. Always get a CNS on joint aspirate. Always get a CNS. And the third tube, you'll ask for a microscopic exam for crystals under normal light and under birefringent light. Birefringent is they have a filter that they put in there. There's positive and negative birefringents that they look at. And I'll explain it in just a second. It's like polarized or non-polarized, if you want to. It's not quite the same, but I mean it's similar. Okay. All right. Any questions about that? Other causes of a effusion in a joint are down here. Hemorrhagic, due to trauma, or if they're on Coumadin or any other type of blood thinner, any type of platelet disorder, chronic diseases like leukemia or myeloma that might affect clotting, and then considering tapping the joint in order to do these things. One of the considerations you'll always hear is if you started out with a non-infected joint and you stuck that needle through the skin, now you've just introduced staph into the joint. So it wasn't infected, now it is. The incidence of that, though, if you do it under sterile technique, which is, if you're going to tap a joint, it's sterile technique. You use betadine on the site, and then you have sterile gloves, and your tools here are sterile. The incidence of infecting a joint, if it was not infected with a tap, is about 0.1%. So it's very low, very low. So don't feel queasy about tapping a joint. The only queasy thing about tapping a joint is, contrary to what Dr. Latassi says, I've never stuck a needle in a joint I thought had gout. I mean, the resident tap-happy residents over at Family Medicine may do it just because they want to tap a joint, but I've never knowingly stuck a needle in a gout joint. I did stick a needle in a knee effusion that the gout wasn't even on my list of possibilities. Turned out it was gout, so, but it wasn't blown up red like that poor MP joint down here in the toe. I can't even imagine sticking, I was just crazy. Any questions about any of that? All right. Here's the Charcot joint here. Just you see the normal contour of the foot is just not right. In the X-ray here, how the whole roof of the knee of the foot architecture is just collapsed on itself. And this is a classic example of a Charcot joint. When you compare that to that up there on the top, it's pretty bad. Okay. Crystallopathies. There are two crystallopathies that are of primary concern. One is gout and one is pseudo-gout. Gout you've heard of many times. It's the deposition of monosodium urate crystals in the joint space. And the crystals are deposited. If you have a high uric acid level, that's fine. That's fine. There are a lot of people walking around with a high uric acid level. They're either overproducers or undersecretors. You guys know about that? So it's not the high uric acid level that causes gout. It's the change in uric acid level. When you have a change in uric acid level, either it goes up or goes down, that's what precipitates the crystals. So if you're cruising along just fine and all of a sudden you start putting somebody on allopurinol to prevent gout, that's going to lower the uric acid level, that can actually precipitate gout. That's why you don't put anybody on allopurinol when they're having a gout flare, because it'll lower the uric acid level, make the gout flare worse. These crystals, when you look at them under polarized light, they're like little spicules or needles, and they're negatively birefringent. When you hear the words negatively birefringent, or you read them on a board exam, the answer is gout. Monosodium urate, or uric acid crystals, is how most people will do it. The MP joint is the most common affected, but it can affect any other joint. Okay? As it says here, most people are under secretors, and there's nothing you can, well, not really much you can do other than lower the uric acid production level. Okay? Pseudogout is these crystals, pyrophosphate crystals, look more boxy. Really not a good picture of them here. They look more like little tiny boxes rather than, they have blunt ends rather than sharp spines. And these are not negatively birefringent. These are see under regular light. Why people get pseudo-gout, no one really knows. It does tend to run in families. Age is the biggest predictor. The older you are, the more likely you are to have these crystals to deposit. There are some diseases that will increase the likelihood of pseudo-gout, but the presentation of the joint, the hot, red, inflamed, very painful joint of gout and pseudo-gout is the same. The treatment for an acute flare is the same. Okay? The only thing you have to worry about is it an inflammatory joint because of a crystallopathy, or is it an inflammatory joint because of an infection? You can't miss the infection. Which is here. Gram-positive makes up most of them here, and there you go. You can see this knee has an effusion. This would be a positive ballottement. You could actually milk the fluid from one side. If they're lying supine, you can press it down from the top, and it'll bulge at the bottom. You can press in the bottom, and it'll bulge in the top. The articular capsule of the knee communicates with the bursa that surround the knee. So that's why if you're gonna tap a knee, and maybe Travis will mention that this afternoon, if you have a knee effusion here, if you wanna tap the knee, you don't actually have to put the needle in the joint space. You can come up here above the patella and draw off fluid from the suprapatellar bursa, and it's the same fluid because they communicate. The bursa communicates with the joint cavity. If it's a prosthetic joint that's infected, the only treatment for it is to remove the joint, to go in and remove the joint. I had a friend of mine, she used to work at Good Shepherd. Her husband had a hip replacement. He was an older gentleman, had a hip replacement. He got infected. They had to go in, remove the appliance, and put a new one in. He got infected. They had to go back in and remove it. It was just a horrible nightmare that went on for 2 years. I think he got 3 joints before it was just a mess. Okay. You need to know your gram-positive bugs. GC is gram-positive, staph, strep, those things. Okay. Now, osteoarthritis. We've had a lot of talk about OA. Where you see OA is going to be in, primarily in weight-bearing joints, and primarily in large weight-bearing joints. The knee is definitely the most common site, probably followed by the hip. The hands are to a much less degree. Most of what you see in the hand is going to be RA that we'll talk about later. It typically spares, though, these areas, the MP joints and the wrist, which are affected mostly by RA. Okay? And it's pretty easy. You don't need to do much with OA in terms of the diagnosis. Just shoot an x-ray. That's all you got to do. There's no blood test for OA. There's no blood test for inflammatory mediators or non-inflammatory. Remember, it's a non-inflammatory arthritis. Just shoot an x-ray. What you're looking at on the x-ray is, did I put it in the next? Yeah, what you're looking at on the x-ray is a couple of things. One is joint space narrowing. You see the loss of the normal joint space over here and right there. The second thing that you look at is the cortex of the bone. It should be nice and crisp, and you should be able to follow it around, all the way around, as a nice, crisp line, like you see here. In OA, what happens is you start getting feathery, or it's a fuzziness to the line. That's just the inflammatory process going on. The third thing you see are osteophytes. Somewhere up here, like there's an osteophyte, there's an osteophyte, there's an osteophyte right there, you see that? Okay. Osteophytes that look like little hooks typically are growing up into the tendon that they're attached to. It's attaching there. It's calcification of the tendon, which means that joint has been overused. Sclerosis is the other thing here, thickening of the articular surfaces. Rheumatoid arthritis is, now we start getting into the science a little bit. Unlike osteoarthritis, which is purely an overuse, age-related process, rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune disease. And there's a juvenile form, there's an adult form. Most of what you're going to see is the adult form. It's, as it says here, it's polyarticular. A lot of people are affected here. 1% out of the whole population, and most of them are women. There is a genetic predisposition, HLA-DR4, But just because you have a DR4 major histocompatibility antigen, remember the HLA, doesn't mean you're going to have rheumatoid arthritis. So it definitely, it's a predictor, it's not causation. Affects several different joints, both weight-bearing and non-weight-bearing. And we talked about before, I think we talked about before, that in the joint, yeah, we did in pathophysiology, two of the inflammatory mediators that predominate in rheumatoid arthritis are tumor necrosis factor and interleukins. And that's, the biologic drug therapy is targeted towards them. There's to diagnose rheumatology requires several things. As far as signs and symptoms, here's a list of things the American College of Rheumatology, I think that's who American College of Rheumatology wants to see in terms of signs and symptoms. In terms of testing, though, here's what you want to do. A lot of places will have an arthritis panel. If they don't have an arthritis panel, you have to specify these things individually. So you're going to get a rheumatoid factor, and I'll explain that in a second. You're going to get an anti-nuclear antibody, or an ANA. You're going to get an anti-CCP, which is a citrinylated peptide, down here on the bottom. A sed rate or a CRP. You don't need to get both, as I mentioned before. UA and a CBC for the purpose of documenting anemia of chronic disease. You're not expecting anything to go on with the CBC or the white count with RA. And rheumatoid factor. What is rheumatoid factor? As it says here, it's an IgM antibody. It's directed against the FC portion of IgG. You know what the FC portion is? Everybody not know what, somebody shaking their head no. If you look at an IgG antibody, it looks like that. They're cross bridges here. This is the FC portion. Excuse me, I'm sorry. This is the FAB portion. This is the FC portion there. Do I have that right? Or backwards? I can't remember. I think that's the that's the FC portion. No, that's the This is the FC?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, 'cause these are the antibodies. Yeah. These are the Fab fragments.
Fragment crystallized.
Fab fragments. And this is the F constant region. This is the constant region. So all immunoglobulin IgGs have this, if you have this in common. These are the different attachment points to the different antibodies. These are variable, but this is always the same. This is the part where you have the antibodies directed in RF, okay? So if you have RA, rheumatoid arthritis, then you have a positive RF only 85% of the time. But as it says right here, 3% of everybody has a positive RF. This is not causation. This is correlation or predictability. A positive RF is also present in other connective tissue diseases, but to a much lesser extent. And you see there with Sjogren's and lupus. Interestingly, in juvenile RA, only 1 in 5 will have a positive RF. So you cannot use RF in a child, essentially. Now, if you look at anti-CCP, in terms of the sensitivity, it's only about 50%, a little bit better than that. But the specificity is damn high. Specificity, you know the difference between sensitivity and specificity, I hope by now. The predictability, if you have the disease, it's gonna be positive. If you don't have the disease, it will be negative, essentially, as a specificity, right? So, if you have a negative RF, and because of the specificity, if you have a negative anti-CCP, you don't have RA. And I've used that a lot. A person come in with musculoskeletal complaints that sort of fit these criteria here. And RA is on my differential. Just get an RF and an anti-CCP. You've got your answer. Okay?
But would you still treat as RA? Because like with Dr. Latassi, she was talking about mildly active disease without the poor prognostic factors. Like, can we still treat the symptoms as RA, or just, like, what would you do?
I mean, you're still going to treat it the same
Right.
because it's a musculoskeletal complaint. You know, and something may change down the road where these turn positive. But right now, the likelihood that you have RA is very small. Okay? The problem is when you start combining an RF and an ANA, that gets you in trouble a lot because you have these things that are predictability and that they're present in a whole bunch of people, and you're dealing with a 22-year-old. Do you have lupus? There's no rash. Do you have lupus? Do I go ahead now at your age and start treating you for lupus? It's a difficult thing to get at unless, you know, if you come in textbook load up with lupus, it's pretty easy. The problem with these connective tissue diseases is when you just don't have a textbook case. Because the treatment for these things, other than NSAIDs, is some nasty stuff. Methotrexate, Plaquenil, did she go over Plaquenil? And then you get into those biologics. I was talking to a guy yesterday, psoriasis. His dermatologist had him on a biologic, $28,000 a month is the cost of that prescription. Okay.
So if you're not, if they don't have RA necessarily, how do you know that it's not from some other cause and then you treat them for RA even though they have negative?
Well, it's you know, you're developing a differential.
Right.
If you came, if Zane, because he's more likely to have gonorrhea, if he came in with, I'm just saying, he has a high titer. No, if he came in with, say, let's go back here. If he came in with polyarticular joint problems, and he fit some of these criteria, what is on your differential? What is on your differential? RA, overuse. He comes in with bilateral knee pain, hip pain, ankle pain. Well, yeah, because he goes out there and plays basketball with the basketball team, and he's a little guy versus these 6'8" guys, and they beat him up. You know, that could be part. He could be, catting around with the wrong people. It could be crystallopathy. It could be a lot of things. We're going to rule out the bad stuff. What's the bad stuff? The only bad stuff is it's a septic joint. Otherwise, we're going to treat him the same. If it doesn't get better after he quits playing basketball, we get his gonorrhea cleared up, and it's still there, then you start taking some off of the list, and now you're closer to RA. So it's the thing about rheumatology is there's a lot of blood testing involved, and there's a lot of prediction, and there's a lot of eventually getting to the diagnosis. Okay? I don't know if that helped you. Oh, by the way, there's a syphilis outbreak in Oklahoma County. I was alerted to it. You know that? Okay. Patient 0. 190 confirmed cases in Oklahoma County linked to IV drug use and being friendly with sex workers. So y'all cool your jets this weekend. Let's talk about the A&A here. Then we'll take a break. A&A is positive in, well, 25% of the population. If you're 80 years old, it's most likely going to be positive. So when you get an A&A, you're going to get two things. You're going to get three things. You're going to get a positive or negative, and then you're going to get a pattern, and you're going to get a titer. So those are the three things. Positive or negative, a titer, and a positive or negative based on the titer. And then you're going to get a pattern. I'll say it again, Amy. It'll be positive or negative based on the titer. Right here is your lab, and it varies between labs. Some labs, it'll be 1 to 40, some 1 to 80, some 1 to 128. It just varies. But they'll say that you have antibodies to nuclear antigens, and I'll explain what nuclear antigens are in a minute. And what the titer is. If you have a low titer, that in terms of, they follow all these low titers over time and say, well, if you got a titer of 1 to 40, you're not likely to develop a connective tissue disease of any type. So they call it negative. However, if your titer is 1 to 1,280 or 1 to 2,000 whatever, then it's not only positive, but you're likely to develop whatever disorder is down the road for you. So the lab will report positive or negative based on the titer. And then what they do is that they plate it, they do a process called immunofluorescence. They put your serum onto a monolayer of cells. And the antibodies that you have in your serum attached to the different parts of the cells. And then they take another antibody that's tagged with a fluorescent marker. And that second antibody is directed against the Fc portion of your antibodies, or of human antibodies, IgG. So wherever your pathologic antibodies attached, it will light up. You understand what I mean? So if you draw it out, if you have, here's the tissue cell here, and here is the nucleus of that cell. These anti-nuclear antibodies, they're directed against nuclear proteins, like the centromere, or the edge, or the envelope, or the membrane of the nucleus, or histones, or some other type of protein that's in the nucleus. So your antibodies, let's say, attach to something in the nucleus. And then we put that second antibody on there that's attached to fluorescein. And under ultraviolet light, fluorescein will glow. And that's what you see down here in the bottom. So you'll get a pattern. If it's homogeneous, then if you look up here, homogeneous is commonly seen, and it's nonspecific. So if you have a low titer and a homogeneous pattern, it means you essentially have a a negative ANA for any particular disease. So in Zane over here, if I got an RF, if his RF was negative and his anti-CCP was negative, and he had a negative ANA titer and a negative and a homogeneous pattern, for example, he doesn't have a connective tissue disease. Now there are other patterns here. This is to the nucleolus. This is a speckled pattern to different, I think the histones or something like that. The pattern suggests a certain disease. If you look over here, peripheral patterns or nucleolar patterns are pretty high predictors of lupus. So if you came in with a rash, you're a young woman, you came in with a rash, you have a high titer and a nucleolar pattern, you probably have lupus. The likelihood that you have lupus is quite high. Keeping in mind that this is not causation. I mean, it probably is to a certain degree. I mean, I'm sure it is. But because a lot of people have positive ANAs, you can't freaking say you have lupus. You have to correlate the lab with the person. All right? The other one, predictability is quite high, is scleroderma. Centromere in particular. If you have a centromere pattern and your titer is high and you present with signs and symptoms of scleroderma, you have scleroderma. Right here, ANA is not specific for RA. You don't even use an ANA in the diagnosis of RA. It's not helpful. At least it's not for me. I use CCP and RF. Okay? But 99% positive if it's Sjogren. And if you're going to make the diagnosis of SLE or lupus, you got to have a positive ANA. Okay. In this slide right here, this tells you the nuclear pattern of an ANA and the diseases that it's associated with, and I've defined these diseases over here. We're going to talk about crest and scleroderma later on. We're going to talk about all of those later on. But these are the relationships. Some are stronger than others, as I illustrated over here. Now, these right here go into other non-ANA related antibodies. There are a whole host of them. Anti-Jo, anti-Smith, anti-SCL70, anti-double-stranded DNA, anti-single-stranded DNA. The OMRF, Oklahoma Medical Research Foundation over there was a guy that used to work over there, his name was Mo Reichland. He was the head of their connective tissue diseases. He was instrumental in the world in coming up in identifying these different autoantibodies. His labs and his people were. They actually they have a thing called a Reichland profile. The Reichland profile is a panel for connective tissue diseases. It contains an RF, an anti-CCP, an ANA, and all of these different things that are listed here. And so you get this sheet back with all these positives and negatives and titers, and trying to interpret this is just freaking almost impossible. with some exceptions. And that's what we're gonna talk about today. Now, that's why they have rheumatologists, because they know how to interpret all these different extractable antigens or antibodies and what they mean in terms of correlating it with disease. The only problem is, there are only about 3 rheumatologists in the entire freaking state. If you call a rheumatologist, if your family doctor called a rheumatologist to try to get me in with insurance, the wait time is what now? You know what it is for your husband?
At least 2.5 months.
How long?
2.5 months.
2.5 months. And that's somebody with insurance. So it's worse than that over at OU. It's at least 6 months at OU. And if you're a Medicaid, it's a year. So, okay. All right. A couple of things here. Crest, and then we're going to talk about this later on. I just wanted to point out what telangiectasias are and what calcinosis cutis is. Calcinosis cutis is the development of like hard rock calcified deposits in certain parts of the body. It happens a lot in front of the knees and on the elbows. This is calcinosis cutis. Telangiectasia, or you see here, you see people that have these spider type things. They're not varicose veins. They're more arterial. They are arterial in spider-like patterns. They occur on the face. They occur on anywhere, but they're most prominent and obvious on the face. Okay. Let's do these, and then we'll. No, go take a break. Take a break.